Hello, everyone. I guess we'll get started. So next 60 minutes or so, the agenda will be to go through some of the key changes that we should expect in the latest edition of PMBOK, that is the sixth edition. So we're going to see an overview of what has changed really. I hope I'm able to, or you are able to see my screen as well as I'm audible. So really, what we are going to explore is what has changed. Has it really changed? If yes, how much is the change? And how does it affect maybe the exam also going forward? That will be the kind of agenda for this overview session. So to start with, the first question is, has it really changed? I guess the answer is yes and no. Yes, because per se the framework has undergone some changes, and what are those changes? We will explore in the next 30-40 minutes. And no, also because fundamentally, as such, the framework which PMBOK hasn't really and can't really change. We still have same knowledge areas, process groups, processes. So overall, the basic foundations remain the same, but still it has changed. The biggest or the most important change that we will witness in the sixth edition is the acknowledgement of agile approaches to doing the projects. In fact, with the sixth edition, we also get the agile practice guide along with the PMBOK guide. So together, it's more than 900 pages worth of material that will be able to download as the members. So the practice guide comes along with it. That's probably the agile practice guide comes along with it. Is probably the most significant change, and all throughout the guide, the context of agile has been addressed. The exact details we're going to see now, but still per se, overall broadly, the framework of PMBOK per se has not really changed. So let's explore what has really changed. I'll start with a quick summary, and then we'll do a little bit of deep dive into each of the area. So to start with, first thing is, as you can see on the screen, there is some consistency brought in terms of how the inputs as well as the outputs, as well as the tools and techniques will be organized in every process. So some rules, like for example, wherever project charter will appear as an input, will always be the first input. Wherever project management plan will be an input, and if charter is also an input, then project management plan will be the second input. If charter is not the input and only project management plan is the input, then project management plan will be the first input, and so on. So they've come up with some consistency in terms of the order in which the inputs will appear. Same applies, I guess, with the outputs. Also, one more change that you'll notice is, so far in PMBOK 5th edition, we had seen project management plan as input and also project documents as input in many places. But here you will see a difference, that it is further subdivided, and you will see the key plans or key components of project management plan, which are the more significant inputs for a particular process, will be also listed, as you can see on the screen with the red outline. So that's a change that kind of has happened to the way the details are structured. Um, and also, moving on, the second change that you will notice is the tools and techniques are now grouped or categorized by their purpose. So, for example, there are some data gathering tools or techniques rather. At same way, there are some data analysis techniques. Sometimes there is information gathering techniques. Sometimes it is interpersonal skills, and so on. So different skills which fall under a particular category will appear grouped by that. Like you can see on the screen, this one example I've shown. For example, brainstorming or checklist or interviews, etc., is a data gathering technique, and it will be shown like you see in this slide. It'll appear as data gathering, and then further you will see the relevant techniques of that category, which will be relevant for this particular process. So it'll be organized like this, and that is a consistency or a structure to the information that appears in every process. This is one change, I guess, that's there in the PMBOK, which I think is good, because now while reading it, you'll see some pattern. Something more about tools and techniques is, Appendix X6, which is one of the appendices in the PMBOK guide, has actually the details of all the tools and techniques by different knowledge areas. So I'll just move on to the next slide, where you will see an example. So this is how the appendix has given that summary as to which technique is being used in which knowledge area, and the technique is of which type. For example, here on this particular screen, there's an example of data gathering techniques, under which you see different techniques like brainstorming, checklist, check sheet, interviews, and so on. So all these are under the category of data gathering, and there you will see a matrix which shows which technique is used in which knowledge area and in which process, which is, I think, very good, because it's a good summary of which technique is used where. And like this is just one example of one category of techniques. Like this, there are other categories as well, and this has been summarized in Appendix X6. Which is another change, I believe, in the 6th edition, which is, I think, a good summary for especially those who are going to prepare for the exam. A quick summary of techniques by process. I think this will be helpful. By the way, in case if you have any questions as we go along, feel free to type it in the chat window. I may pick some questions along the way as I see them, or maybe I'll pick some questions towards the end once we're done with the details. Okay, so I'll just move on to next key change, which is about Agile. Now, as I said at the beginning of this session, one of the biggest or most significant change is the guide now acknowledges Agile all throughout. The details of Agile I'm not going to cover right now in this 1 hour, but the guide comes along with a separate Agile practice guide, as I said before. Along with that, in each of the knowledge area, there is a subsection included at the start of each knowledge area, where you'll see a subsection called considerations for adaptive environments, and that is where the details of the Agile approach have been highlighted for each of the knowledge area. Like, for example, in time management knowledge area, which is now called as schedule management in 6th edition, there will be a section or a subsection under schedule management knowledge area, which will have considerations for agile or adaptive environments, and it'll talk about sprint planning, etc. So something like this appears in each of the knowledge area now. It's like a subsection of each of the knowledge area before any process starts for that or under that particular knowledge area, and it'll have some description about what considerations are to be taken into account for the adaptive environments, which means basically an agile approach. Similarly, some agile specific tools and techniques have been introduced, like sprint planning, etc. Again, especially during the schedule management part, develop schedule process specifically, you'll see mentions of sprint planning, etc. And of course, you have the Agile Practice Guide, which comes along with the PMBOK, which will have the details of these techniques further elaborated. And of course, there is Appendix X3 in PMBOK, which will have some information about usage of different life cycles, like it could be agile or adaptive or iterative or a predictive approach or even a hybrid approach, and then when to use or which environment or which kind of projects are suitable for which kind of approach. Some description about that has been mentioned in Appendix X3. So this is broadly a change that you will notice in the guide, which is around the agile and agile related concepts. Moving on, the next change or next category of change is about the knowledge area specific changes. Again, I'll go in details of each of the knowledge area in later slides, but this is a summary where you'll see a change for all the knowledge areas, that there are 4 main subsections that will appear under each of the knowledge area. One is key concepts. So it will talk about something like a summary or a crux of that knowledge area. For example, if you look at, say, integration management knowledge area, then the key concepts will refer to things like all the knowledge areas are completely integrated. A project manager's role should be always to make sure that all the knowledge areas are synchronized. A project manager may not get involved in detail for a knowledge area, but rather make sure that it is all integrated and all that. So that is what is covered, or things like that are covered in the key concepts. Next subsection under each of the knowledge area newly introduced is trends and emerging practices. So again, this will talk about specifically the practices that are being used nowadays, but not very common, not on all the projects, but there is a trend that certain practices are being followed or used. For example, now in scheduling or even tracking, monitoring part, or the knowledge areas which are for each of the knowledge area, it will mention that the visual way of tracking. For example, those who are familiar with Agile, you must be knowing things like big visual charts. Or big visible charts is something that is very prevalent in the Agile practices, and that is mentioned under the trends. Although it's not used in every project, but this something like this appears in the trends or emerging practices. Then, of course, there is tailoring considerations, in the sense the separate subsection included for each of the knowledge area, which talks about how the processes under this knowledge area can be tweaked depending on the context of the project. Earlier, I think this was missing, but this has been included now for each of the knowledge area. And lastly, as I mentioned in the previous slide as well, there is a subsection included for the considerations for Agile environments. And of course, two more changes worth mentioning with respect to knowledge areas is, the names of the knowledge areas, two knowledge areas have undergone changes. One is the time management knowledge area. Earlier in till PMBOK 5, it was called project time management. Now it is renamed as project schedule management. And the human resource management knowledge area has been renamed as resource management. It's kind of addresses now all resources, not just human resources. Besides the name change, the knowledge area intent also has undergone a change. Details we'll see in coming slides. Moving on, another category of change is some process changes. Broadly, one process has been removed or rather merged. So we had close procurement process, which has been now merged into the close project or phase process. So earlier we had process, close project or phase. It still continues to remain. Only thing is close procurement now has been merged into that. So process 12.4, chapter number 12, procurement management, is no more there in the new edition. But then there are three processes which have been added. So there's knowledge management related process introduced, manage project knowledge. It appears in execution process group in integration knowledge area. We'll see the details in coming slides. Other than that, there is one more execution process included, that is a process in executing process group, but risk knowledge area, and that's called implement risk responses. So we had planned risk responses earlier. It continues to be there as a process. Along with that, new process included is implementing risk responses. Details we'll see in coming slides. And then we have control resources, which was missing, I guess, in human resource knowledge area. There was no monitoring controlling process. Now we will have a monitoring controlling process in human resource, or rather a resource knowledge area now, and that is process 9.4. So and then of course one knowledge area has been one process has been moved between knowledge areas. So we had a process called estimate activity resources, which was part of time management knowledge area, which is now schedule management, and that has been moved under the resource knowledge area. So these are the changes with respect to processes that have happened. So basically one process has been removed, three new have been added, and one has just shifted its place from schedule knowledge area to the resource knowledge area. The details we are going to see in the next few slides. So moving on, there are some other changes also, major minor probably, are with respect to changes in the names of the processes. So we had quality assurance, perform quality assurance as a process in quality knowledge area, which has been changed to manage quality. It's not just a name change. The purpose of the process also has undergone some change, which we'll see in the coming slides. Plan human resource management, as I said before, has been changed to now plan resource management, because the knowledge area itself has been renamed, and it addresses all resources rather than just human resources. Acquire project team has been now renamed to acquire resources. Develop project team has become develop team, and so on. So there are some processes which have undergone their name changes. Again, the details we are going to cover in the slides to come. So this was a quick snapshot or summary of what are the broad level changes. Now we'll probably do a little bit of deep dive, and we'll go section by section or chapter by chapter in PMBOK 6th edition, what is changing. So I'll move on. The first section, that is first chapter of PMBOK 6th edition. It's about introduction, and let's see what are the key changes in this particular chapter. Per se, this section or this particular chapter of PMBOK in 6th edition has been practically rewritten. Almost it is completely new. There is quite some information included on different development life cycles, the phases, the phase gates, and so on. So this is where you'll find mentions of predictive life cycle, adaptive life cycles, and agile and iterative, and so on. As I mentioned before, there is a separate appendix which further elaborates this, but then the section 1 includes quite some description on these areas as well. Also, there is a description of a selection approach, meaning how do you decide for which project which approach is better? Should it be iterative, agile, predictive, etc.? So some discussion or description is there in the first chapter. The main change that you will notice is the last part, which is business documents. Here, two main things: the business case and benefits management plan has been introduced newly in the 6th edition. Per se, business case was always there in PMBOK 5, but it was just a reference as input to the charter process. But here it talks about quite some details. If you had noticed about a year or year and a half back, PMI had done some role-based study, and then had indicated that the project manager's role is now also changing, where they are involved in analyzing whether the project is worth its investment, and so on. So that is where I think this change is coming from, and which is true, by the way, that nowadays the project managers are also involved in deciding a business case, coming up with pros and cons, and evaluating whether certain project is viable or not. Maybe they don't make the decision, but they are involved in that process. And similarly, there is something called benefits management plan has been introduced, where the viability of a business case is something which is to be reviewed all throughout the project. Maybe at the start of the project, the business case is viable, but it may not remain so. So there's something called as benefit management plan, where you will keep on reviewing whether those benefits are still viable, achievable, and that is the concept that has been introduced. And there's quite some description on these two in the first chapter, and you will notice these being an input in the initiation part or the initiating process group, which is quite logical. So that's the change or summary of a change in the first chapter of the 6th edition. Moving on, the second and the third chapter of PMBOK. The second chapter also has been significantly rewritten, although the change for the description of organization process assets, OPS, or enterprise environmental factors is minimal, rather nothing. So it is more or less as it is. But there is new content on governance, how the project is governed, especially in a distributed kind of an environment, multiple vendors, etc. Then how the governance should happen, different management elements and organization structures. So there's quite some new text or description around that, which is part of the second chapter. In the third chapter, there's a new section included, and quite elaborate section or description on the project manager's role on the team. We are going to see the details in the next slide, but then here again, rather it focuses on the aspect that only the project management skills are not enough. The project manager needs to have leadership skills, the other management skills, soft skills, and even the business acumen part, etc., or strategic management aspects to it, etc. So there's quite some description of how the project manager's role has changed in the last few years, and how different combination or a combination of different skills is becoming relevant for the PM role. So again, they have aligned it to the talent triangle, the PMI talent triangle. I'm sure we all must be familiar with this, but we are going to see it in the next coming few slides. So just few details on what description this chapter has is basically it focuses on the fact that the project manager has to constantly play a role of synchronizing many moving parts. He or she has to be involved in integrating different moving parts. So it's more of integration of different aspects of the project. He or she has to be involved in or has to know the big picture, why the organization is doing some project, so that there is clarity of vision, mission, etc., to the project manager first, so that he or she can convince his or her team members, motivate them, so that whatever they are working on, how it is contributing to the big picture is something the project manager should know. That is what is expected. Because at times, if as a project manager, I myself do not know why I'm doing this project, then how can I convince or motivate the team to contribute on the project? So it stresses on this fact that as a project manager, you need to know the big picture, know the motive behind the project, and hence, as a project manager, probably you also should be involved in that project selection phase. Again, it may vary a bit from organization to organization, but this is kind of covered in this particular section. Um, so again, it stresses more on the needs for soft skills. Earlier as well, the soft skills were mentioned in PMBOK 5, but here there is quite some elaborate description on different soft skills, especially relationship management, communication management, developing networks, formal, informal, etc., and how it is critical to managing projects. I'm sure we all know importance of this, but just that it has been put in black and white with quite some description in PMBOK latest edition. Um, so moving on, as I said before, basically it ties it to, meaning it stresses the fact that the PM competencies at the end of the day will have to be an amalgamation of these three aspects. First, of course, your technical project management skills, the core is that, but it also acknowledges that it is not enough, only that is not enough. A project manager needs to have leadership skills and also the strategic and business management skills. There's quite some description on the chapter. I'll leave it to you guys to explore it with the with the latest edition. But I think all of it makes sense quite. It was just that it was missing in the fifth edition. Now it is captured crystal clear in the latest edition. Okay, so moving on. Now we'll go to, I mean, that is what is covered in the first three chapters. As I said, first chapter is more about the description of the context, and the main change is the business case and the benefits management plan, etc. The second chapter is about org structures, cultures, etc. And the third aspect is more about the role of a project manager, what skills he or she needs to develop, and so on. Then onward starts chapter 4 to 13 is knowledge area specific details. It stays as it is, like in the fifth edition as well. Now we'll go knowledge area wise, chapter wise. So we'll start with the first knowledge area, which is integration management, chapter number 4 of the sixth edition. The main change in this knowledge area is a new process that has been introduced, and that is about knowledge management, which is process 4.4. That is a new process that is included, and it's called managed project knowledge. It's an execution process, which makes sense. That is during execution of the project, and it is something which is ongoing. It doesn't happen only once, but it will be an ongoing thing. So as and when the project progresses, there'll be new knowledge that will be gained. Only thing is, it mentions about capturing it in a structured way. The change now is the new process included, which is manage project knowledge. It talks about capturing the knowledge in a structured way. It mentions about some register also, which is called as lessons learned register. Like we had risk register, stakeholder register, we also now have a lessons learned register, which is one of the project documents, and it will contribute to the OPS. So that's a knowledge area having a change of new process included. Then as I said, the change was about business documents, and they will get referenced or used during the initiation of the project, which is process 4.1, which is develop project charter. So more or less the process has remained the same. Only thing is we'll notice the business documents, which is business case and benefits management plan, as the inputs to this particular process. The output remains as project charter. And again, one more change is the close project or phase process is now going to include the contract closure. So that the process of contract closure has been merged or absorbed into the close project or phase process. So that's the main crux of change in the chapter number 4, which is integration management. And that's a summary. So I guess due to some reason the slides were not probably visible, I guess. So I'll just quickly maybe go back and we'll quickly recap those slides, so that we'll just maybe walk through it once again, because I believe I got a feedback that the slides were not visible to the participants. So I'm going to just maybe flip through it once again, and maybe it will help us to recap things that we have covered so far again. So I'll start with a quick summary. What has changed is some organization of information. So as I said, charter will always be the first input if it is an input to a process. Project management plan will be always a second input if charter is also an input. If charter is missing, plan will be the first input, and so on. So there is an order to the inputs. Also, there is an order to the outputs. You'll also notice that key plans, which are components of the project management plan, will be listed in inputs, which was missing so far. We only had project management plan as input, where as you can see on the screen, it has those details as well included. So this is one change. The second was about tools and techniques, which have been now grouped. As you can see on the screen, certain techniques have been grouped together by their purpose. For example, questionnaire or checklist or interviews or focus group. This is the purpose of all these techniques is data gathering. So they are grouped under something called data gathering techniques, and they will appear grouped by those categories, as you can see on the screen. So this is another change which is there in the latest edition. And of course, Appendix X6 captures the details of all the tools and techniques, and it also organizes them by the knowledge area and processes. So as you can see on the new slide that hopefully has turned on your screens now, that this is an example of data gathering techniques, and then it maps it. It's like a matrix. It shows which technique is used in which knowledge area and in which process, which I think is a very good summary, especially for revision, in the interest of those people who will be going for an exam especially. So another key change was about Agile. So, or this was the main change in the latest edition. So there is, apart from the separate Agile practice guide, you will see a mention of Agile in each of the knowledge area. There is a separate subsection for considerations of adaptive environments and some Agile specific tools and techniques you will notice for different knowledge areas or different processes rather. Appendix X3 also captures some details about the same. So moving on, some knowledge area specific changes. There is some standardized material or contents included in each of the knowledge area. There are 4 sections that you will notice newly introduced at the start of each of the knowledge area, and they are it starts with key concepts for that knowledge area, trends for that particular knowledge area, like for example in scoping, what are the latest trends, tailoring considerations, and then depending on the context, what can be tweaked. And then last is the considerations for agile or adaptive environment. So these 4 subsections will appear in each of the knowledge area. 2 knowledge area names have undergone changes. The time management is now schedule management, and human resource management is now resource management. Some changes with respect to process. Close procurement has been merged with close project or phase, so that process is removed. And 3 new processes have been added: manage project knowledge, implement risk response, control resources. And 1 process has moved. The estimate activity resources process, which was earlier in chapter number 6, time management, is now moving to the resource knowledge area. And now some changes with respect to process names. Quality assurance has become managed quality, human resource management is resource management, and so on. So we'll see this again in the coming slides. So now we'll see the details of it. I think we had just gone through this some time back, so I'm going to skip or go through these slides quickly till we reach a slide where we had left. So chapter number 1 is rewritten. Main inclusion in this is about business documents, the business case, and the benefits management plan. Again, it emphasizes that the project manager is nowadays involved in these activities. Chapter number 2 also has been rewritten. The sections about organization process asset and enterprise environmental factors remains unchanged. Nothing has changed in their description, but there has been new content, quite some elaborate content about the governance and org structures and so on. Section number 3 or chapter number 3 of PMBOK 6th edition has a substantial change where it describes project manager's role and the responsibilities and competencies in quite some more detail. So, and it ties it to the PMI's talent triangle. So it emphasizes on the fact that the project manager's role is more about synchronizing different work. And it actually, the image that you're seeing on the slide, this is what PMBOK has described, that the role of a project manager is more like a conductor of an orchestra, where you may not be actually playing any instrument, but you are actually directing and coordinating different moving parts. And it also stresses on the fact that a project manager needs to have clarity on why this project is being done, what's the overall vision, mission, why we are undertaking some journey, so that he or she can also motivate his or her team, which is essential. Then it stresses on the fact that at the end of the day, if you see all the 9 knowledge areas, except integration, are all the moving parts. You have to keep on synchronizing them all throughout. You have to balance it, and that is what it focuses on. And at the end of the day, it is people who do work on the project, and you have to synchronize between people, manage their expectation. So then relationship management, communication, networking, all these become important. So the focus on soft skills. So it will emphasize on this talent triangle, where it mentions that technical project management skills, core project management skills are key, no doubt about it, but they are not enough. And hence the project manager needs to develop the leadership skills as well as the strategic and business management skills. So I guess this is where we were. And then we had just started seeing changes with respect to knowledge area specific parts. So we'll start with integration management knowledge area. New process included is the managed project knowledge. It is in executing process group, and it talks about accumulating knowledge all throughout the project, and then maintaining it somewhere formally as lessons learned register. So we had risk register, stakeholder register, issue log. It's kind of something similar where knowledge is formally captured, and it will ultimately contribute to the organization process assets or OPS. Another change in this knowledge area is the usage of or reference of business documents, the benefits management plan, and the business case, which is used while initiating the project, process 4.1, as well as it is referenced during the closure of the project, because while closing the project as well, you need to revisit the business case and also the benefits management plan. And it emphasizes the fact that all throughout the project, there has to be a continuous eye on the the benefits that the project is supposed to deliver. That is why the business case has to be viable all throughout. And of course, one more change in this knowledge area is the change to the closure process, where close procurement has been brought into or absorbed into the close project or phase process. So these are main changes to this knowledge area. Mainly it's 4.4 managed project knowledge as a new process included, and process 4.6 close project or phase now becomes 4.7 because there is additional process included in this knowledge area, and it absorbs the procurement part. Um, Moving on, this is some glimpse of the description of the managed project knowledge process, which is newly included. As you can see, the project documents includes lessons learned register, resource break, and so on as our inputs, as well as lessons learned register is an output, which underlines the fact that knowledge management is a ongoing, all throughout living process. And then this lessons learned register is a living document. Moving on to the second knowledge area, which is scope management. Per se, nothing has changed in this knowledge area. So no change in chapter number 5. Of course, some tools and techniques have been regrouped, like I showed you some time back. So in collect requirements, for instance, we had a laundry list of techniques like focus group and brainstorming, mind mapping, and whatnot. It just have been restructured or properly organized. So brainstorming and questionnaire and survey, etc., will come under data gathering. Something will come under data analysis, and then decision making, and so on. So those changes, of course, have happened, but per se, nothing else has changed, meaning no major change in the input, outputs, tools, techniques, structure of the process, intent of the process. Nothing has changed. Moving on, chapter number 6, schedule management knowledge area. The main change that has happened, and the probably the trivial most change that has happened, is the name of this knowledge area has changed. Earlier it was called project time management. Now it is called project schedule management. The reason being, the project manager doesn't only manage the time, but he rather manages the schedule of the project. So that is where it made sense to rename it, and which is okay. Other change that has happened is there was a process called 6.4 estimate activity resources, which used to find out what different types of resources a project will require. Now that has moved into the resource knowledge area, because now earlier we had human resource management knowledge area, which has been switched to resource management knowledge area, which takes care of all the resources. So I guess it made sense to move the estimation of what resources we need as a process to go into that knowledge area. So this is a change that has happened. So process 6.4 moves from chapter number 6 into chapter number 9. It is a planning process, but moves into the different knowledge area. Other small changes that you will notice is some agile concepts or techniques rather being mentioned during developing a schedule process, like sprint planning has been mentioned as a technique, which is like time boxing and then planning for a few weeks, etc. So other than this, nothing significant has changed for the schedule management knowledge area also. So just to recap, three main changes only. One is the name has changed, which is, I think, trivial. Second, process has moved into another knowledge area. And third, you will notice references to some agile specific techniques in some of the processes, especially the develop schedule process. One more change worth mentioning is some techniques have been dropped or removed. For example, critical chain management was one of the techniques in developing project schedule. It has been removed. It's not mentioned in the in that particular process. So some changes like this has happened in chapter number 6. But again, intent or overall input outputs, nothing much has changed in chapter number 6. Moving on, chapter number 7, which is cost management knowledge area. Again, good news is nothing has changed in this knowledge area. We still continue to have 3 processes: plan cost management, estimate costs, and determine budgets. You continue to get cost baseline as an output, main output from this, and cost management plan. these are planning processes. You continue to have control cost as a control process or monitoring controlling process for chapter number 7. Nothing has changed per se drastically. Only one change. We had technique called vendor bid analysis, which was part of estimate cost. It has been removed. Moving on, chapter number 8. Again, this chapter earlier had 3 processes: plan quality management, then perform quality assurance, and control quality. It continues to have 3 processes. Plan quality management as it is, nothing much has changed. The intent remains same, input outputs more or less same. Control quality also more or less continues to remain the same. Only thing is it is called monitor control quality. It's a monitoring controlling process. The change has happened to process 8.2. Earlier, process 8.2 was perform quality assurance, and the focus was on audits and making sure that right process is followed and all that. There's a change here where the intent of the process has undergone a bit of a change. It's not only about auditing whether we are following the right process and all, but it's also more about translating that planned thing into an executable quality activities that is doing all that. For example, the plan was to have some checklist for maybe code review. Then the actual managed quality will make sure that that is being done. And of course, there's a continuous improvement part. That is that plan, do, check, act, PDCA cycle, which is to be followed religiously. So you get a feedback, you adapt, you change, and that is how you drive the process change. So quality assurance, where you do an audit, is one of the aspects, but there are other aspects also, like taking those feedbacks and then adapting your processes, driving that change in the process, etc. also has been included under the purview of this particular process. So since its intent has undergone a change, it made sense, I think, to rename it appropriately as manage quality rather than only perform quality assurance. So this is a main change in this knowledge area. The other 2 processes, that is planning and monitoring, more or less are staying the same. There's not much change in those processes. Of course, some tools and techniques have been dropped. For example, there is a laundry list of techniques in quality assurance and plan quality management. Things like process decision program chart, interrelationship diagram, tree diagram, and then and so on. I mean, all those or some of those have been dropped, probably because their research surfaced that they're not very widely used, which is good because the number of techniques that we now need to study has gone down. So this is another change worth mentioning. But the main change is to the process 8.2, which has undergone change in its intent itself, and hence the name. So moving on, next knowledge area, which is our chapter number 9, is human resource management, which is now changed to resource management. So the focus has now expanded from just human resources to all the resources. So it will include material, equipment, all those resources, and hence the process of estimating how many resources you need has shifted to this knowledge area, like we saw during the slides for chapter number 6. So now it distinguishes two main types of resources. One is team resources, which is human, and then physical resources, which are more of materials and equipments or others. And since now this knowledge area is more on resource management, most of the processes have been renamed. So for example, plan human resource management is now plan resource management, and it will not only plan for staffing of human beings, but it will also plan for procurement of maybe material resources or even equipments and their calendars and so on. So that is a change which has happened in the planning process of this knowledge area, besides just the name change, because its intent also has changed, or its purpose also has changed. Similarly, estimate activity resources is now another planning process in the human resource knowledge area. So earlier we had only one planning process in this chapter. Now there are 2. One is plan human resource management. Second is estimating those resources. So this estimate process has just moved from chapter number 6. More or less it is as it is, just that it is now part of chapter number 9. Other than that, one one main change is the monitoring controlling process introduced in chapter number 9. Earlier, or till the 5th edition of PMBOK, which is currently still valid, we didn't have any monitoring controlling process in the HR knowledge area. Only this knowledge area didn't have an monitoring process. Now we have that process. There is a process called control resources. Although, point to notice, control resources basically monitors the physical resources. It does not still deal with the team resources. That remains with manage team as a process. So, but then there is a monitoring controlling process included in this particular chapter. So, just in a summary, this chapter earlier had um, 4 processes. Now it will have 6 processes, because one has moved from chapter number 6, which is estimate resources, and the control process has been added. And of course, every process has undergone name change to not have only human resource specific things, but any resource. So main changes, it's catering all types of resources, and some processes shifted, new process added. So that's about chapter number 9. Moving on, chapter number 10. Nothing has changed in chapter number 10, except a process name has been changed from control communication to monitor communication. The reason being, as a project manager, you don't really control the communication, but you facilitate the communication. So just to justify the intent of the process, it has been renamed to monitor communication. Rest everything in this chapter stays as it is. It has 3 processes: plan, communication, management, the actual managed communications, which is execution process, and then one monitoring process, which used to be control communication, which will be now monitor communication. Rest everything is as it is. Nothing much has changed in its input, outputs, intent, or nothing. Moving on, chapter number 11, risk management. This chapter has one new process which is introduced. In fact, we talked about 3 new processes being introduced. One was in chapter number 4, which is knowledge management related process. Then second was the control resource process, which we just saw in chapter number 9. And the third one is implement risk responses, which is now an executing process included in risk management knowledge area. So till PMBOK 5, we had planning processes in this knowledge area. There are 5 planning processes, and there is one monitoring controlling process. There was no executing process, which is now being added in the 6th edition. So we'll have a new process called implement risk response. So the intent of this process is that so there's a way to deal with risk identified during planning. So we have a plan to respond to the risk. Now this process will make sure that whatever is planned is actually being done, and that is implemented. So there are some actionable items which you actually do, take those actions, and of course the monitoring part will remain with the monitoring part. So other than that, one new or one other change that has happened is one new risk response has been included. So earlier for threats, we used to have 4 risk responses. One was avoid, second was transfer, third was mitigate, and the fourth was accept. Now there's one more that is included, which is escalate, especially for the risks which are outside the sphere of influence of project manager, or they are outside of the context of the project itself, and then they will be escalated to maybe a senior level, that is program or portfolio or appropriate level in the organization. And such risks will then be owned by, or the ownership of such risk will be now with the respective people, and then these are not tracked during the project. So that is what has been included as one other aspect. One minor change: control risk has been renamed to monitor risks, because again, the reason being, project manager doesn't really control the risks, but they monitor the risks. So one more change worth mentioning is something about risk report. Now, we had risk register, which is to capture all the risks of the project. Now we'll have something called as risk report also included, where a summary of the key risks on the project, along with the actions chosen, their priority, or the risk response plans, and their train will be included. So this will be something which will appear during identify risk, analysis of risk, response to the risks, and as well as tracking to the risk. So this will be like a living document, and it will appear in or all throughout the risk management knowledge areas. So just to recap, risk management, 4 main changes. One is the new process that is included, which is implement risk responses, which is about actually taking those actions to deal with the risks. Another type of risk response included, which was escalate. And the third one is you will have the risk report as one more project document included. And of course, one minor change is the process name has changed from control risk to monitor risk. So this chapter earlier had 6 processes. Now it will have 7 processes because it has one new process included. Moving on to chapter number 12, which is procurement management. Again, one main change that you will notice in this chapter is one process has been dropped, which is close procurement. As I mentioned before, it has become part of close project or phase, so it doesn't appear in this chapter. So earlier we used to have 4 processes as part of this knowledge area. Now we'll have 3. We continue to have plan procurement management, then conduct procurement, and control procurement. The close procurement is no more there because it's part of close project or phase. One change or main change that has happened is the acknowledgement that nowadays the projects are being done with global presence, where multiple vendors from multiple different geographies are being involved, and hence different legal aspects of different countries involved. And hence the contracting should acknowledge those or consider those. So there's some emphasis mentioned during planning procurement, and in fact we'll see that in the coming slide. So plan procurement management process, it remains more or less as it is, but one significant change in this process is in its outputs. So earlier we used to have some procurement documents which are like RFPs and RFQs as main output of this process. Along with that, we used to have a procurement management plan. So they continue. Only thing is, along with procurement management plan, there's one more output included in this process or the plan procurement process, that is called procurement strategy. And now this specifically addresses those global nature of the projects where you might be procuring items from different vendors from different geographies, and then you need to be really strategizing it about what are different phases in which you are going to get the procurement done. What are the delivery methods of getting those things delivered to you, any contract types, any legal aspects that you need to worry about, and so on. The procurement management plan continues, but then it has specific guidance on a timetable or metrics or templates to be used, any independent estimates, preferred vendors, and stuff like that. So that is how they have separated it between the two main outputs of this process. So procurement management plan continues as output, but along with that we'll see strategy as another output in this process. And now the procurement documents have been renamed as bid documents, which essentially refer to the same as RFI, RFQs, or RFPs, etc. So that's the main change in this process. Per se, you won't see a significant difference in input-output tool techniques, but the internals have changed a bit like this. Other than that, the other 2 processes, that is conduct procurement and control procurement, haven't really changed. They remain more or less the same. So moving on to the last chapter, and we also have probably 6 minutes left, and hopefully we'll complete in time. So the last chapter is the stakeholder management. Again, nothing much significant has changed in this chapter. We used to have 4 processes. We continue to have 4 processes. Plan stakeholder management as it is continues as the same. Only thing is its name has changed. Plan stakeholder management has been renamed to plan stakeholder engagement. The reason being, you really plan how you will engage with the stakeholder. So since the name has to be more or should reflect the intent of the process, so it has renamed. So the process is now plan stakeholder engagement, and therefore the output is stakeholder engagement plan. Per se, nothing else has changed in this process. The input output tool techniques remain the same, intent remains same. Minor change in the wording because the intent is justified by that change. Control stakeholder engagement again has been renamed to monitor, because per se you don't really control a stakeholder's engagement, you facilitate or monitor a stakeholder engagement. So That is why again it has been renamed, but broadly nothing has changed. So plan stakeholder management becomes plan stakeholder engagement. Manage stakeholder engagement stays as the same. Monitor stakeholder engagement is now, or that is a new name for control stakeholders. And identify stakeholder, which was which was the first process in fact in this chapter, continues to be as it is. So, and you will have a stakeholder register coming out of that. So per se nothing much is changing in the chapter number 13. So that's a summary chapter wise for what has changed in the latest edition. I have not gone in details of the Agile Practice Guide purposefully, because again we had only 1 hour, and this time was required for covering the details of the guide itself. For the practice guide, maybe we'll do a separate such session. What is changing or worth mentioning last, because you have another 3-4 minutes, worth mentioning is the exam as such is not changing immediately. It is going to change from 26th of March 2018. So it's almost 6 months away. So there's a lot of time for the exam to undergo a change with the latest edition. So as of now, obviously, the classes for PMP and the preparation continues with PMBOK 5, because I believe 2-3 months is a good enough time for people to prepare and go for the exam. So it continues. There's nothing changing as of now. The preparation continues with PMBOK 5. We also need time to upgrade our content, get it reviewed and all that. So we have that time. And then the actual exam switches from March 26th, 2018, which is about 6 months away. So maybe before that, 1 or 2 months before that, you would see even the preparation for the exam switching to 6th edition. So till the end of this year, most likely, nothing is going to change. We stay on 5th edition, and the preparation continues with 5th edition. In fact, you can clear exam for sure on the 5th edition itself. Because there's a long way to go before it changes. 6 months is a very long time. Unfortunately, we've run out of time. We just have 2 minutes left. In case if you have any other questions, or if there are questions in the chat window, I will probably go through it and maybe we'll address them separately, or we can reply that through an email, or we can do a follow-up session to address those questions. Okay, so thanks a lot for your time. Hope you found it useful, and apologies for the first few minutes where you couldn't see the slides properly. If you have any feedback, please do get in touch with us, and about the questions, we'll definitely get back to you. Thank you.